this is something that's been very passionate for a very long time. It did say that most of my career was in family ministry, but it was also I've been in education department all my life, and it's always been a passion of mine to just kind of um, like I had millions of questions as I was growing up. I had millions of questions, and I made my pastor just crazy because I just kept asking these millions of questions, and I'm gonna be honest with you, he didn't answer these questions, satisfactorily. I was just like, man, it just doesn't make any sense. So guess what? I said, I'm going to go to seminary where I could learn this stuff. And guess what? Seminary didn't teach me that either. So I had to, when I went into ministry, I ended up working with a bunch of apologetic organizations. And a lot of people don't like to hear this name anymore, but RZIM, I work with RZIM, Stand to Reason, so that we can help our students understand apologetics and kingdom culture and communicating our faith cross culturally and to unbelievers. And um, it's just been a passion of mine, and we've been working on it. And as Sam, Pastor Yvonne, and I were talking, it just came to light. And for me to share this with you is just it's just a great honor and pleasure. So before we begin, where is all this actually coming from? What do you mean by communicating kingdom culture? Well, we know that we're all living in a post-Christian world, right? So Christianity is no longer the dominant worldview, and it makes our lives very complicated because we now have to contend with so many different worldviews as we work, as we study, go to school, and basically live our daily lives. The reality is that number one, let's just be honest, we can't even bring up Jesus because they don't even believe in God. They don't even believe that God exists. So how can we share the gospel to people that don't even believe that God exists, right? So there's an issue there, and we're constantly dealing with this. I wish we were back in the '80s where we could just walk up to people and say, "Hey, I want to talk about Jesus. What do you think?" Right? And you could actually have conversations like that. But these days, it's really, really hard to do that. And I think over the years, I think many of us lost our confidence in the truth, right? And I think what ended up happening was that we resorted to subjectivity. You believe, ideas like you believe what you believe, and I believe what I believe, and there is actually no objective truth. It's all relative and subjective. And this is the prevailing idea in many of our social circles. Sadly, we see this in many of our churches, and we see this in many Christian individuals as they, for lack of a better term, as they conform to the worldviews that are surrounding them. So today, I want to show how we can be confident about the existence of God and that we are still part of God's kingdom. And this kingdom is very objective, it's not subjective. So through today's talk, I hope to give you some information and communication tips that will help you gain more confidence in God's existence. And when we live with that confidence, you'll become the fruit of that kingdom culture. And basically, when we are confident in something, we tend to find a way to communicate it. So I think confidence is very, very important. So I hope and pray that our talk will be helpful to you. So let's get started. First, let's define what kingdom culture is. What is kingdom culture? First, I want to separate the two words. What is kingdom? Well, kingdom, we all know this word, is an individual's rule or authority over uh, his or her subject. But in God's kingdom, what we're saying is that God's kingdom is God's rule and authority over his creation, over the entire universe. And the topic of kingdom is actually pretty important for us because Jesus himself taught more about kingdom than almost any other topic. The Greek word for kingdom, basileia, is used 126 times in the four gospels. So kingdom is very relevant for us and is very significant in our lives. So then that's kingdom. What is culture? And the simplest definition of culture, I think, is just what is the way of life? Why do we do what we do? The way we do things, the way we think. Those are all culture. Now, if we put kingdom and culture together, we get this. Kingdom culture then is us living with the knowledge and attitude that God exists and God exists and He created this universe and everything in it. That's one thing that we must affirm. And He is the sovereign authority over the entire universe. Whatever He created, He is the sovereign authority. Now, this attitude, while it's good for us to have, as you can imagine, this attitude rubs people the wrong way, right? They think that this kind of attitude is actually pretty arrogant and pretentious, and nobody likes a pretentious, arrogant person. So this makes us communicating this culture um, very, very difficult. But it doesn't have to be, and this is why I'm having this talk. The difficulties of sharing the kingdom culture is because it does sound so um, pretentious and arrogant, right? But it doesn't have to be. I'm just telling you that it can be very respectful and very loving. But the first thing that we have to acknowledge is that the kingdom culture is objective. And we have to get over this. Otherwise, none of this will work. And that's why this title is Communicating Kingdom Culture than anything else. So, kingdom culture is objective, it's not subjective, right? Which means, by definition, kingdom culture transcends all cultures. It doesn't matter where you come from, it doesn't matter who you are in this world, entire universe, right? Kingdom culture transcends all cultures, right? So therefore, kingdom culture cannot be subjective. It's objective. Well, let's define actually what is the meaning of objectivity in our context. Whatever we're saying is true. Objectivity is that it's true regardless of human intervention or consciousness. So to say that kingdom culture is um, objective means this. And actually, I want to read for you the definition from this book, Dictionary of Jesus and the Gospels by Joe Green and others. And this is basically what it says. Sorry. And this is what it says. It says, kingdom does not depend for its existence on human activity. Humans do not create, build, construct, extend, or render present the kingdom. The kingdom originates with God, it draws its character from God, and it precedes any human response to it, even though, and this is very important, even though its presence invites or demands human response. So, you guys, kingdom culture is objective. This is basically the definition of kingdom is that it's an objective reality. This means that all creatures are subject to this objective culture, whether we like it or not, because it transcends humanity. Whether we like it or not, it's here and we can't get away from it. It's with us. So let's look at what Jesus teaches about kingdom, and it kind of confirms what this definition was, right? And Jesus says, and it all comes from the book of Matthew, and Jesus says that kingdom is God's, right? Kingdom is coming. Kingdom is near us. Kingdom has come upon us. Kingdom needs to be entered. Kingdom is to be preached, and kingdom is designed to grow. This is very important. Kingdom is designed to grow. So we are the tools, and you and I, we are the tools that communicate this kingdom culture wherever we go. And what's important is that in Matthew 16:19, Jesus gave us this authority to invoke, right? It doesn't come from us, but He gave us the authority to invoke this kingdom culture on this earth. And Matthew 16:19 says this: I will give you the keys of the kingdom of heaven. And whatever you bind on earth shall be bound in heaven. And whatever you loose on earth shall be loosed in heaven. That's Matthew 16:19. You guys, based on this, we are pretty powerful people, right? So, how can we communicate this kingdom culture without being arrogant and pretentious? Because everything that I've talked about so far is just says that Christianity and God's kingdom is just it transcends everything, and we're above it. And you guys are kind of below us, or not us, but above below God, and you're subject to God. So, how do we communicate this kingdom culture without being arrogant and pretentious? And there are many different ways, right? We could declare it, right? I mean, where I work, uh, our office, where me and Dr. Newman share our office in Koreatown, it's on Wilshire. And when I go out to lunch, there's always this guy. I don't know if Dr. Newman saw him before, but he's always there, and he's got a megaphone, and he's calling out sinners, and he says, he said, you're all going to hell. This, he says it boldly. And he says, turn from your sins and come back to the Lord. The kingdom is at hand. And he's literally being John the Baptist, right? And that's just one of the ways I think you could share the kingdom culture. I don't know if that's such a good idea. You guys can do that too. I don't know if you guys watch the show The Office. It's kind of an old show, right? I don't know if you guys watch it, but there's a character, the main character. His name is Michael Scott, and he's having this financial issues, and he decides that he needs to declare bankruptcy, right? So he goes to office, and he goes, "Hey, listen up, everybody! I declare bankruptcy," right? He just declares it, right? I guess you guys could go to your office. Is it tomorrow's Friday? So you guys could go back to office tomorrow and say, "Hey, listen up, everybody! I declare the kingdom of God in this place." You guys could do that, but I don't think it would be a good idea. I think that there is a way for us to communicate the kingdom culture and communicate the gospel with love, respect, and gentleness. And we're not strangers to this idea, because I think all of us, to a certain extent, whether it's vocational or whether it's in just society, we've all been empowered to lead. And when we lead, we have to do it with respect. We have to do it with gentleness, and we have to do it with love. Otherwise, you're not going to get anywhere. So, yeah, kingdom culture transcends all cultures, and it is objective, and everyone is subject to it. But we can communicate that with love, respect, and gentleness. And I think that's precisely what First Peter 3:15 is teaching. First Peter 3:15 says this: "But in your hearts honor Christ the Lord as holy, always being prepared to make a defense," and that's important, to make a defense to anyone who asks you for a reason for the hope that is in you, yet do it with gentleness and respect. This passage teaches that people will come to us for answers. Why? Because we're the only ones with hope. And if you really think about it, Christianity makes a bold statement, right? That Jesus is the only way. And if this is true, and it is, anyone who rejects that truth is, by contrast, hopeless. And we're going to see this a little bit later on. But when we look at true atheists, and we have to emphasize true atheists, because there are a lot of atheists who really are not atheists. True atheists, who are really true to themselves, has to say that reality, who we are and our environment, our life itself, reality itself, as we know it, is an illusion, right? And let me repeat that. True atheists who are true to themselves has to say that reality, as we know it, is an illusion. And I don't know a statement that is more hopeless than that. Well, we have to communicate this hope to the hopeless. But check out what it says. It says to make a defense, not offense. And it says to do it with gentleness and respect. You guys, we're going to encounter all kinds of different worldviews, different cultures. And if we don't approach these different worldviews and cultures with gentleness and respect, they're not going to respect you. And more importantly, they're not going to listen to you. And this is so important. So we have to remember that as we communicate our faith to others, we have to do it with gentleness and respect. With that said, we have to be very mindful of the people who we come across. Now, we're dealing with our everyday life, right? So, everyday life. So, we technically know the environment. We actually know the very people that we're going to be running into day in and day out. And these are the people that we're supposed to be communicating our culture with, or the kingdom culture with. So we technically know who we're going to run into. So it is very important that we are very mindful of the people that we're going to come across on our day in our daily lives, right? And there are basically four types of people that we can run into. There's the first one is the fighter, right? I call it the fighter, and I believe it's they're all in your notes. And the fighter is basically out to get you. They don't care about the truth, right? They're pretty much they're usually very well prepared, and they're out to prove you wrong, and they're out to prove that you're dumb, delusional, irrational, and sometimes they're out to prove that you're evil, right? And they're just a lot of them can come to you in a very belligerent way, right? And we were talking about this very topic, and Pastor Ivan told a story, and it reminded me of an encounter that I had with this kind of a fighter type of person. And it might not look like it, but I used to be a art director. I still am actually. I used to be an art director in the movie industry in Hollywood, and I worked with a lot of studios. I worked with a lot of different movie projects, and I was working with this studio person, and I haven't worked with her for a very long time. And she came into the office, my firm, and we're just kind of sitting, getting ready to work. But man, as soon as she sat down, she just started going off about. She started bashing just Christians. She said how like Christians are like homophobes, and they're bigots, and they're irrational. She just started going off, and to be honest with you, I was getting kind of angry. I was getting offended, and what I said was, and we'll learn a little bit later that how bad my reaction was. But I said to her, I'm Christian, and you guys, that's a bad bad reaction in that environment. And I told her, hey, I'm Christian, and you know what she said? She just said, you are? Well, F you too. And then she just walked out. And we had a project to finish, right? And she just walked out. I'm like, what just happened? Right. And I was so but she was just a fighter. Again, I reacted badly, but she was just one of those person that just hated Christianity. And I don't think she cares about the truth. She just needed to just let everyone know that Christianity is foolish, right? And stupid. And I was the person just sitting there. And what's so interesting about that, and this is a totally off topic, but if I was if I was like, light of the world, if I was like a city that cannot be hidden, I wonder if she would have, said those kind of things to me. If she knew that I was Christian, I think she was kind of in a place where, hey, Spencer's, I've never seen Spencer with the character of a Christian, so I think I feel safe to say these things to him. And I don't know. I mean, I repented a lot, but there's some truth there, so I have to repent for that. But anyways, that's the fighter, right? So I'm sure that you guys all know fighters in your life. And there's the second person would be the I don't care person. People just these people are so tough to talk to because they just don't care about anything. They don't care about when I say they don't care about any of this is this topic of God's existence and the gospel. They couldn't care less. And my brother is one of these persons. And by the way, I'm the only Christian in my family. In a very extended family, I'm the only Christian. And my sister, it was actually a fighter. So my sister and I would get in this fight all the time. And it would get so heated up. And then we would just turn to our brother and go, hey Don, what do you think? Right. And then he'd left a long time ago because he doesn't care. He didn't want to hear it. He doesn't like these kind of talks. but it was at least my sister, because we always talked. We were, I actually got to share the gospel with her, but my brother, he never wanted to talk about this. So it was a lot harder for me to talk about the gospel with him. And in fact, we live very far apart, and we don't see each other often. But yeah, my brother is the only one that I didn't get to share the gospel with because he just never wants to talk about it. Yeah, so it's tough. So I don't care person is really difficult. The one that is really pleasure to talk to is the I want the truth person. These people are searching for the truth, and when you run into someone like this, you could talk to them for hours. And one time, one of my church members' husband was a non-believer, and he didn't believe that God existed, and he ridiculed God. I made fun of her all the time, and she was very sad by that. And so she came to see me and say, "Hey, my husband is like this and like this." And I say, "Hey, if your husband ever wants to talk about anything about Christianity, whatever, I'm there. I'm willing to do it. I'll buy him dinner and coffee, and we can talk." And he accepted my invitation, and we ate, and then we spent 4 hours at Starbucks because just started asking all these questions, and it turned out that he was really searching for the truth, and I gave it to him. I gave it to him for 4 hours, and he didn't become a Christian, but he came to church that Sunday, and he's still not Christian, but he doesn't say that God does not exist anymore. In fact, he fears God, which is very important. But that's a long story. But he was an example of I want the truth person, and the truth hasn't set him free, but truth is working in his life for sure. And the fourth person is I need help person. And this person, this person could be masked, and he could come as he or she could come as a fighter. He could come as an I don't care person. I want the truth person. But if you really start talking to that person, what you realize is that, oh, they need help. They need healing. They need restoration. And so as we encounter these types of people or a combination or mixture of these people, we need to consider two different approaches to communicating kingdom culture and communicating your Christian convictions and beliefs, right? And the first one is the emotional approach. This is the sensitive approach. This is the pastoral approach. I think I put on there pastor versus professor. I'm not saying that you guys are going to become a pastor or a professor, but what I'm saying is pastoral approach is more of care, and professor is more of like intellectual art, conversation. That's why I put pastor and pastor. I had to think really hard to come up with two-letter common letters, and I do that often. I think if you guys were with me last time, I threw all kinds of like three C's of love or two whatever and things like that. Anyways, so the first is the emotional approach. Second is the intellectual approach, or the pastoral approach, or the professor approach. Now, I think I put on your notes, I put slash stage. I actually prefer stage. So if you guys have a pen, I would just kind of put a circle around stage, because I believe that we have to always start with the pastoral approach, because at the end of the day, we have no idea where these people are coming from. Even though we have studied them, they might when they ask a question. Let's say that you've are just they know that you're a Christian, and they ask you a question. It might be just coming out of the blue, and if we do not approach their question with the pastoral approach, then we could be misunderstanding their question, and it could go bad really fast. And that's an example of what I faced as an art director in Hollywood. All right. We have to make sure that we go by not so much approaches, but we have to go by stages. And I would say that we approach all questions or all conversation first pastorally with care, and then help them come to an intellectual stage where we could have a rational conversation. Without that stage, it can go bad really fast. And that Hollywood incident was a perfect example of that. Now, how do we care? how do we approach it with a pastoral uh, approach? We have to ask as many questions as possible. In fact, I would say ask as many questions as they will allow. Right? You can say stuff like, "That's a very good question. Is there a particular reason why you asked that?" You know, or you could say, you can if they make a statement, you can say, "Well, how did you come to that conclusion?" Right? And I want to take you back to that Hollywood example when she started going off and started bashing Christianity, had I known now what I knew, then what I know now, I would have asked this question. I would say, wow, you're very passionate about this topic. What makes you so passionate about this? And what makes you think the way you do? I would have asked something like that. And then maybe she could have shared something. But as it turns out, I found out later on through another colleague at that company, we talked and because we have to do the project because she walked out on me, right? So, we're talking and, he was talking and I've known this guy for a really long time. We worked on a bunch of projects. And, he told me that I heard you guys had a little thing. And I'm like, yeah, it was very uncomfortable. And he was like, just try to understand it because, she has a homosexual brother and he was discriminated at work and in fact he got beat up at a bar so during that time there was a lot of in the news about homosexuality and how Christianity were against us so she just kind of snapped she didn't really have anything against Christianity she just kind of snapped and she was just venting she didn't have anything really against it and because I didn't ask questions. I did not, I wasn't pastoral and I was more like, hey, I'm a Christian. Don't cross this line. Like, and the only response to her was, her only response could be was, and she just put on that defensive mechanism and she just, she basically flipped me off and then left. And so I called her. I felt so bad, and I called her, and I didn't mention anything, but I just said, "Hey, I just wanted to apologize. I acted very badly." And as it turns out, she was like, "Oh, had I known you're a Christian, I would have never said those things." And it's so embarrassing that she didn't know that. But like, she's like, like she was so embarrassed when I told her that I'm Christian. She was so embarrassed that she didn't know what to say, and she just the defensive mechanism just kicked in, and she just said those things. So I told her, hey, if you ever want to just talk about it, I'm willing to do that. But we decided, she's like, no, we just keep it professional. We ended up working together again, but it was very awkward. but but yeah, I feel like I missed my chance. Like God gives us like golden, teaching moments, and I missed my chance at that time. So it's very important, you guys. We have to concentrate. We have to ask a lot of questions, and we have to concentrate on their answers, and we have to basically find out where they're coming from, right? And and the issue is we should never answer anything. You know what I mean? If they're asking a question, we should never answer anything. Our first response should be a question, right? And if that questions and they're like, oh no, whatever, man. I just want to, yeah, I know that. I just want to know what this means. And then you can go into the intellectual, but our first response should always be a question. And I'll give you another example, right? You might actually encounter this a lot, right? I've encountered this a lot. It says this person, this person could say, I don't believe in God. I don't believe in Jesus. Am I going to hell? You guys could really, if you look at this question, right? This is not an intellectual question, even though it's a question, right? But it's not an intellectual question. This is an emotional question. And so you have to find out where this person is coming from. If you answer this and the correct answer, intellectual answer is yes, you're going to hell. You guys, the conversation ends. And you know what? And I think that you will be missing a chance in the same way that I missed my chance. And I think the first response should be a question, right? And we'll find out, right? That by asking questions, you can find out exactly where she's coming from. You can ask something like, I'll give you an example. You can ask something like, hey, are you saying, I just want to ask you a couple more questions to make sure that I understand you correctly. Are you saying that you know that God exists, and Jesus exists, but are you saying that you don't believe that? Right? So you could ask that question. And if she says yes, or if he or she, I say she a lot, not because I have anything against women. I'm so sorry. But when I write papers, I always write she, like it's just something I do. But anyways, so please forgive me if I just keep saying she for all my examples. So if he or she responds, yes, that's exactly it. You know that this person is not being rational, right? If you say that I know that God exists, but I don't believe, that's not a rational statement, right? And you can ask this question. You can say, if Christianity is true, would you believe it? And if this person was irrational, you know what our answer will be, or his answer would be, no, I would not believe it. And you know what? This is the case in many, many times. And you can also ask this. You can also say, are you saying then that you know that God does not exist? So therefore you don't believe. And so are you going to hell? Are you asking that? And that person says yes to that. You have to have a follow up question. The follow up question, how do you know that God does not exist? Right. And this is where, I should mention that anytime anytime anyone makes a truth claim, the burden of proof is on them. And realize that I haven't said anything yet. I haven't said anything to this person. So I don't have the burden of proof is not on me. The burden of proof is on them so far, right? They know that God does not exist, so they don't believe. Well, your question is, well, how do you know that God does not exist? And if you go on that conversation, we know and we could figure out why, and we can then strategize our conversation to cover that, right? Another question could be, I don't, you can say, are you saying that you don't know if God exists and you don't know if heaven or hell exists, but you're not convinced, so are you going to hell? So you could ask those kind of questions, and based on the answer you can have a conversation. I don't think our first response should never be an answer, an intellectual answer. We have to be pastoral, and we have to be asking a lot of questions so that we find out where they're coming from. And the person might not even say, any one of those, right? The person could say none of the above. Actually, my grandma just died, and she didn't believe Jesus. I don't even know if she's ever heard of Jesus, and I would hate to think that she's burning in hell right now, right? So if that person says something like that, then you're going to be in a pastoral stage as long as it needs to be, right? You might never even go to the internet intellectual stage. You might just have to be pastoral and care for this person for a long time. But I think, and you know what? If you approach it, you might even come out making a friend, right? Because when you show someone that you care and you're helping them heal and helping them restore, you might make a friend, and you might have even deeper opportunity, more opportunity to actually share that kingdom culture. So we really have to find out where this person is coming from. So let's say that you're conversing, and then somehow, let's say that you get to the point of the intellectual approach. For us to share our knowledge and our intellect about whatever topic that we're talking about, whether it's the existence of God, the problem of evil, or all of those things. We have to know the answer, and the only way for us to gain intellectual knowledge is to be intentional about learning. Right? We have to read, we have to watch, we have to learn. Right? Did I put on the? Did I give you guys the book recommendation? Samuel, did I give you a book recommendation on there? Is it on there? Okay, good. There's two books that I want to recommend, and this is the reason why I recommend these books is because it's such an easy read. It's fun read. It might be fun for me because I'm a nerd, but um, it's a fun read. The first one is "I Don't Have Enough Faith to Be an Atheist," and this is by Norman Geisler and Frank Turek. These are great guys. They go on. Frank Turek goes on a lot of debates, and he's actually pretty good. And the book is such a fun read, but it will help you guys really learn to converse with other worldviews about God. And I think it'll be very helpful. It's been so helpful for me too. The second one is Tactics by Gregory Kokel, and this is about strategy, about communicating and talking with non-believers. about the truth. And Gregory Kokel is the founder and I believe the CEO of Stand to Reason. And this guy is so smart. I had a conversation when I was working with Stand to Reason. I had a opportunity to talk with him, and I mean, when he talks, I'm like, "What are you talking about?" Like, I'm so lost. It just goes right over my head. But his book, he wrote his book very readably, and is really comfortable and fun read, and it will really help you guys a lot. So these two books is a good start for you guys to gain knowledge and have confidence in this topic, the existence of God, and all these other things. The important thing is to equip yourself. Obviously, can you imagine a defense attorney going to court unprepared? Right. Not only is the lawyer going to lose, the lawyer would not be representing the client faithfully. So we have to prepare ourselves. Knowledge, we cannot share what we don't know, right? So ask a lot of questions and understand their worldviews, where they are, where they're coming from, and prepare yourself well. Let's do another example. Let's do another example. I think this is helpful, and this will actually be a good segue to the next topic. And the next topic is a topic that I think that comes up most between a conversation between Christians and non-believers, and it's the problem of evil. Why does God allow suffering and evil? And this is the topic, a conversation. If in fact I asked 70 college leaders um, who does campus ministry, I asked them, "What do you guys want to talk about?" And they said, if God is so good? Why does He allow evil?" And this is what they're dealing with. So, so I want to bring that as an example, and we can talk about that. Okay, let's say someone comes up to you and says, "If God is good, um, why did He allow something terrible like COVID-19? Why does God allow something this evil?" Right. So again, based on what we learned, we have to find out where the question is coming from, right? You can ask something like, "Yeah, this is horrible. So many people are affected by this, and it's crazy." But the question has to come out, right? You have to say, "Well, how did your family do? Is everyone okay?" Right? And if they say no, "Oh no, we're all good, man. I just wanted to know why God allows something bad like this," right? Well, then you can, if someone says that, you can go straight to the intellectual stage. You just say, "God has to allow suffering and evil because of love," and then and we're going to talk about that in a little bit, right? But if this person says, "Yeah, we lost someone," and then you'll be in that pastoral stage for as long as it's necessary. All right. And again, when your objective is to care for that person and to help them heal and restore, you know, I think it would be wonderful if you make a friend, and then that friend you will have a long time to share your kingdom culture with. So I think pastoral, we can never underestimate or under um, value the importance of being pastoral. And you don't have to be a pastor. Being pastoral just means that you care for them, right? So let's say you're talking to this person and somehow you help them get to from the emotional stage, and now they're at the intellectual stage, and we can have a rational conversation. And I think we can answer then, what does God allow suffering and evil? And let's talk about that. So I want you guys to know this. Uh, and why does God, if God is so good, why does God allow suffering and evil? And I know that this may sound counterintuitive, but God allows suffering and evil because He loves us and because He wants us to love Him. And this is the important part. Look, when God was about to create this world, He could have had three options, right? First one is not create anything at all. He could have been content in His perfect relationship with the Trinity and just live like that for eternity, right? That could have been His option number one. Option number two could have been he could have created a world with only good. And I think that sounds pretty good, right? But there's more to that than meets the eye. Or option number three, he could have created this world that we're living right now where good and evil exist. And let me tell you that a world with good and evil, both good and evil, is the only scenario where true love is possible, right? God loves us and created us to respond to that love with genuine love of our own. If God created the world with only good and we are pre wired, or if you will, pre programmed to do only good, to choose Him and love Him, well, that wouldn't be love, right? We would be robots. I'll give you an example. Ladies, if a guy comes up to you and says, "Hey, I love you," and guess what? You love me too. Well, that makes no sense. That wouldn't be love. But if a guy comes to you and says, I love you, and I'm going to show you my love, and I'm going to prove my love to you, and you have all the time in the world to respond to me, and the choice is yours, right? And if that and if you choose to love that guy back, it's because you chose to, and because you chose freely, you guys can experience love, right? We don't want to be robots, right? And God doesn't want this either. He wanted us to have a genuine love relationship with us. But in order to do that, he has to give us he has to give us the freedom to choose to love him. In order to freely choose him, we have to have good and evil. We have to have right and wrong. This is this is very, very important that we know this. Only in this scenario where good and evil exist, we can experience love with God and others. So, so some choose good, some choose evil. And when evil is chosen, there is suffering. And we all know that, right? And I'm gonna be honest with you, the opposite, the atheistic intellects don't have any problems with this argument, right? But they do say this. They say, okay, cool, I'll give you that. But what about natural disasters, right? That has nothing to do with human choice, right? Well, I would say it's not true at all. I think natural disasters happen because of human freedom. And let me tell you what I mean by that. You guys, it's only a disaster, right, when human freedom is involved. If a natural disaster like tsunami, earthquake, or tornado, hurricane, or whatever, let's say that it happened in a deserted island in the middle of nowhere where there's no human being, is that still evil? Is that still a disaster? Or is it just nature doing its thing? It's only evil. It's only a disaster when people are involved and people are harmed in some way. Well, wherever natural disasters occur, the people living there is there by choice. I know this is hard to accept, but it's they're there by choice. And they knew the risk of the natural disasters that's prone in that area. Tsunamis only happen in coastal cities, but we choose to live in coastal cities because it's beautiful, right? You think you think that tsunamis only happen recently and we don't know about it and it's all surprise to us? I don't think so. We Tsunamis been happening all throughout history. We know exactly where tsunamis are going to hit, and they always hit coastal cities. We're still there, and you know what? It's one of the most expensive places to live. And earthquake. I don't know if you guys remember. I don't know if you guys are old enough to be uh, to remember the 1991 Northridge earthquakes. I lived through it. I lived in Northridge at that time, and it was the most scariest thing I've ever experienced. And guess what? Many people moved out. They said, "There's no way I'm going to live in this. This is the scariest thing ever." Right? But guess what? As many as left, that many moved in, and they knew about the earthquake. Right? They moved in because the real estate was the prices of homes dropped, and they wanted to live there. They know. We all know that a big one hits, California could be an island, right? we all live here. We all live here by choice. It's the same thing with tornadoes. The same thing with hurricanes. Tornado is called Tornado Alley. Why? Because that's where tornadoes happen. But we all live there, and we always rebuild, and we're always shaking our fist. We're all shaking our fist at God. Why would you allow something like that? Right? COVID-19 it's the same thing. COVID-19 didn't spread because it was God is evil. You know, COVID-19 spread because people's total disregard for others' safety, right? If the moment COVID hit and we knew and people made a big deal out of it, if we all went into our homes, into our closets, and you know what, for the sake of others and sake of my safety, I am going to lock myself in the house and not do anything, right? No. My area, there was a party every Friday night, every Saturday. There's a party. They were not wearing their masks. Are you kidding? And you know what? If you look at my area, the number of positive COVID cases is outrageous, right? And it's because they don't care. They rather party. They rather have their freedom than to care. And we believe that freedom is worth a lot more than natural disasters. It's not about God, it's about us, right? I see it. And this is you guys, and again, this is another good argument. And um, what's the saddest part is that do you know why most Christians leave the faith? In fact, you actually read a lot these days. There's so many like high profile Christians leaving the faith, like worship leaders, like pastors, and they're leaving the faith. Why? Why are they leaving? Because they can't reconcile all the evil that is in this world with a loving God. And I don't understand it. I don't understand. It's because they don't have this knowledge. They try to understand, they try to reconcile that God is good and he cannot possibly allow evil. And if God allows evil, then he doesn't exist. That is not rational. It's not rational thought. And in fact, you know, non Christians, atheists would say that the argument that I just made for, what does God allow evil? What is the natural disasters? They would concede that that is a good argument. I didn't make up these arguments, right? I studied these, and it's because, and I gather these studies, and it's because atheists agree that it's a good argument, right? But Christians, we do not know. Um, Unfortunately, pastors, worship leaders, they're not taught this rational thought, and they leave the Christian faith, right? So you should have confidence in this area. Many, like I said, many atheistic intellects are willing to accept these arguments, right? But here's the issue. Now, there is sometimes you could run into some really, really, really smart atheists, and even though they will give you the first two arguments that I made, they might ask this question. And if they ask this question, we cannot answer it. And we would have to consider that's a very good question, but I can't answer that question for you. And this is the question. And I just want to give you this question because just in case that somebody might be actually smart enough to ask it. And it's again a problem evil, but it's actually a problem of evil and good. And they pose the question this way. I'll give you an example. It says they could say something like, okay, so God watches 6 million Jews being massacred, right? Millions of people dying from disasters and diseases, and God, because God is God and He's all powerful. He's watching this real time, right? And because God is powerful, he has the power to stop it, right? And if he doesn't stop it, right, there must, and this is because he's a good God, there must be a good moral justification for it. They would ask, what could it possibly be that justification that he would allow and he would not stop this evil from happening? And If that person asks, whoever that person is, if they ask that question, you just clap your hands and go, that is a good question. And you know what? We can't answer that. I can't answer that. But there's a good reason why we can't answer this question. For us to answer this question, we have to assume God-like perspective of time, matter, and space. And we can't do that. That's God's, right? We cannot have a godlike perspective of time, matter, and space, and so we cannot do that. So, and neither can the person asking the question, right? So the person cannot do it because number one, he doesn't believe God exists, so he cannot have a godlike perspective question. It's a conundrum that we cannot answer, right? But we can say this though: can God stop evil and get rid of evil? Can God stop evil? Right? Number one, he can't. He can't contradict himself. He can't stop evil. Why? Because if he stops evil, the only then only good exists, right? And if only good exists, that will introduce the creation scenario number two, right? Where only good exists, and he doesn't want a bunch of robots, so he wants genuine love. So he cannot create a world where only good exists. So he cannot get rid of it because he cannot contradict himself, right? Number two, and this is by law of contradiction. Number two, we don't want God to get rid of evil, right? Because if every time someone does anything evil, and then his reaction is let's get rid of that evil, well, guess what? None of us would be around to enjoy that world because we'll be all gone. There will be no one here because everyone is evil, right? We do not want God to get rid of evil. Just the way it is. And number three, he has done it in the past, and we don't like it. We definitely don't like it. I'll give you an example, right? He warned the Canaanites who were like torturing babies and sacrificing babies on a hot molten made up a god, and they would sacrifice babies this way, and they were just evil, and God warned them and that you better stop this or I'm going to do something about it, and they didn't stop. So what did God do? God says, uh, Israelites go and annihilate the Canaanites, right? And which they obey and do. Now, there's one time, right? And God got rid of evil. And one of the biggest arguments that, the atheists make is how can God, annihilate a whole race, genocide, and like, well, there's one time God got rid of evil and now you complaining, right? So we don't like it. We don't like it when God gets rid of evil. And there's another prime example is the flood, right? God literally got rid of all evil, right? And for atheists, they don't even consider this to be a real story. They think they can't even fathom the thought of God just get rid of the entire world except for one family. So they think that this is the Christians' imagination. It's just a fairy tale story. They don't think that it ever actually happened because they can't fathom it. We don't like it. We don't like it when God gets rid of evil, right? And so the reason for suffering and evil is human freedom. And we love that freedom. We make conscious, free choices, which we love to do. And this has incredible rewards and incredible consequences too. And it affects us all. So, but check this out: God's plan is so awesome, right? Because he promises an eternal future where freedom, right, and perfect holiness coexist. It doesn't happen, it can't happen in this world. But he promises a future where freedom and perfect holiness coexist. And you know what? We are living out that incredible promise and his perfect plan. So we just have to wait a little longer, right? And another good thing about it's not a good thing about existence of good and evil, but a thing about existence of good and evil is that it serves as one of the greatest evidence for the existence of God, and we call that the moral argument. And I'm sure you guys have heard this moral argument before, but the reason why I bring up there's many other existence for God's evidence for God's existence or arguments for God's existence, but I think the moral argument is the easiest one to remember I think it's the best argument, and I think that this topic of morality can be taught, can be the conversation of morality can be had with anyone. So I think that's why I want to introduce you guys this moral argument, and I think that would be helpful. The moral argument is very important, guys, but it's very simple. That's why I want to bring it to you. The simplicity of the Christian worldview is this on morality is that if objective moral standards, guidelines, law exist, if there is a objective morality, then there must be a lawgiver, which is God. Therefore, if objective morality exists, God exists. So, definition of objectivity, I think we did this before, is true. So, if morality, objective morality is true regardless of human intervention or consciousness, right? So basically, C.S. Lewis says this, and it's a perfect example. A man does not call a line crooked unless he has some idea of a straight line. Now, this is a very simple. So if objective morality exists, and there is a standard of morality, there must be that lawgiver, and that lawgiver has to be personal because he's choosing to give that law to his people, and that if that personal God lawgiver exists, and that that there is a lawgiver, that has to be God. So if objective morality exists, God exists, right? That's just the simple Christian worldview of that. Now, atheistic worldview on morality is this, and this is very important. Morality is subjective, straight up. Good and evil, justice and injustice are basically an illusion of our makeup. So we're just basically DNA, and this is true for evolutionists, materialists. They believe that we're just a product of our DNA, and we just react to that DNA and reality itself. So therefore, the good and evil that we feel inside, justice and injustice that we actually know and feel, is just an illusion. And this is very, very important. Richard Dawkins, he wrote a book called God Delusion, and he is the most formidable atheist challenging Christians. And he says this, he says, it's pretty hard to defend absolutist morals on grounds other than religious ones. So basically what he's saying is religion has the best explanation for absolute morals. He's saying if atheistic view evolution is true, if materialism is true, then morality is subjective. And they're willing to admit to this. And morality being subjective is a huge, huge problem. According to Dawkins, right, he also says that if there is no God, right, if there is no God, there is nothing but pitiless indifference. And basically, this is where, this is the foundation of their hopelessness, right? A guy named Alex O'Connor, and he's a up-and-coming atheist, so smart. He says that, and you could tell it in a statement. He says that any argument for moral skepticism will be based on premises which are less obvious than the existence of objective moral value itself. What he's saying is that objective moral values are, it seems like we all have objective moral values, right? And he thinks that there's less obvious. What he's saying is that, sorry, what he's saying is that we tend to have objective moral value in us, right? Than subjective moral values. The problem is that objective moral value that we think we have inside is just an illusion, basically, right? And it's just a weak argument. And why do atheists say stuff like this to make their arguments weak? It's because the reality of life, and just like Alex O'Connor says, that we make objective moral decisions whether we believe God or not, right? So in their own words, it seems like there are objective moral standards engraved in us, right? Now they would say that morality is just engraved in us as part of us, but it's just an illusion. So they would have to say this. They would have to say that morality, at the end of the day, is subjective because we are just reacting to whatever our DNA is programmed us to be, right? And if morality is subjective, right? And this is important, how can anyone objectively judge what is good and evil, right and wrong, right? But that's not reality. So, for example, I mean, if we can take this all the way to like World War II and talk about like Hitler and Stalin, right? Whatever they whatever they did was subjective, right? We can say that if atheism is true and if morality is subjective, we cannot judge Hitler or Stalin for killing millions and millions of people because they felt that it was beneficial to them. They felt that it was a good thing to do, right? But that's not reality. We all of us, tend to judge collectively and objectively, right? Uh, most atheists we encounter rarely hold this view, right? But they say things like we don't need God to have objective morality. They use terms like we ought to, should, need, good, better, evil, right? Atheists this is why I say this is why I say true atheists and just atheists that don't know that they're atheists, right? They use these arguments. We don't need God to have objective morality, but then you have to ask, then where did you get your morality from? Why are you using things like ought, should, need, good, better, evil? Those are moral terms. You can't use moral terms when it's subjective, right? Because ought is an objective word. Should is an objective word. Need is an objective word. It's not a subjective word. If it is subjective, then I could actually, whoever I'm talking to, I could just hit him, take his wallet, and say, you know what? It's good for me to take your wallet and feed my family with it. All right. But that's not reality, right? Atheists that use moral terms are basically self defeating themselves because they're using terms taken from God's moral vocabulary, right? And this is where I think we can just do the bottom line. Christian worldview is this, is that humans discover morality, which was given to us by God. Atheistic view is this, humans produce or invent morality because it is beneficial. And when we have these two contrasting views, we know that that's not reality. We know that reality is that humans discover morality as we grow up and as we learn, as we live in society, which was given by a lawgiver, and that's God, right? So true atheists would have to say that morality is ultimately subjective, and that simply isn't the case. Now, there's a minor problem with this, and it's only a minor problem. This moral argument only points to a personal God, not necessarily the Christian God, right? But the good news is that uh, it's not as big of a problem as we think, because if we really look at the most popular or the biggest religions in the world, we can actually take out a lot of them out because they don't have personal gods, right? Eastern and Far East religions like Hinduism, Buddhism, Confucianism, Taoism, Shantoism, those religions do not have a personal God. They have either forces or different gods, and it's not a personal God that gives laws, right? So you could take them out. Now, we can take out Jehovah's Witnesses and Mormons because they claim to be Christians, but Christians reject them as cults, so they're out. So that actually leaves us with only the God of Judaism, Islam, and Christianity, right? And it happens to be the same God. Now, the only difference which one is right is it comes to Jesus Christ. He becomes the factor that divides these three worldviews between Judaism, Islam, and Christianity. And then at that point, the reliability of the New Testament becomes the next argument, which I will not be going into. But I share, you guys, a fraction of the truth that should add to our confidence. And we need confidence if we're not going to conform to this world. And I'll just close with this. Romans 12:2. It says, do not conform to this world, but be transformed by the renewal of your mind, right? You guys, post-Christian world is not easy on Christians, right? Because a lot of the times we're seen as intolerant. A lot of the times we're seen as condoning discrimination of the marginalized, right? Christians are seen as ignorant, but we all know it's not the truth, right? And the problem is that sometimes we do sound intolerant. Sometimes we do sound like we're condoning discrimination of the marginalized. Sometimes we do sound like we're ignorant, like blind faith, right? And I think it's because we are not equipping the mind. And Matthew 22:37 says to love your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your mind. And I think it is very important that we equip the mind uh, biblically. I think it's all in your notes. We have to read, study, and obey it. We have to equip the mind cross and interculturally. We have to observe cultures around us. We have to learn and respect their worldviews. But we have to make sure that we do not conform to their worldviews. And finally, we have to equip the mind apologetically, not feeling sorry. This is very important, right? Apologetics means to make a defense, right? So, and we have three C's here, and I love doing stuff like this, right? So, for us to equip the mind apologetically, we have to have a communication strategy, and that's clarity, right? We have to communicate with gentleness and respect, and that's confidence. I don't know if you guys have two people arguing. The one that just goes out of control or is usually the one that is not confident. The confidence ones usually keep their cool and collected, right? So we have to communicate with gentleness and respect. We have to establish uh, this kingdom culture wherever we go. We have to not establish, but invoke this kingdom culture wherever we go. And when we are equipped, God will use you. I promise this. I promise this. God's infinite wisdom, He's not going to send you out to battle to defend the kingdom when you're not equipped, because you're going to get crushed, right? I used to tell my church this all the time. Why would God send a person who needs His word, care, and restoration and fellowship to a church that is not prepared to receive that? So when we are ready, when we are equipped, God will use you to establish His kingdom wherever you go. He will connect you with a person who needs to hear the truth. And I promise you that. You are that powerful. So I hope and pray that you prepare yourself with confidence.